that's the case, kita mulai ya. I welcome the Prime Minister to open the case of the government. Here.
All right. Oh, wait. If you have any POI, just unmute yourself. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So we see right now in status quo that people in this world who come from minorities, that they have sexual identity that is not in the majority, where they are probably part of the LGBTQ plus community. They are living in a world being grappled by the fear of how there is lots of homophobia in this world, and because they have to live and survive in a world that is very heteronormative right now. We think that sexuality is actually how someone identify their attraction towards other people or no attraction, and this falls in terms like homosexuals, heterosexuals, asexual, pansexual, and any other categories. We want here on the opening government, we want a better world where people can learn to understand each other, not to mention on cases, on matters that are sensitive like this one. But the problem right now, that cannot happen because there are a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of stigma, stereotypes of people that are LGBTQ plus kan. And the reason of this misunderstanding comes from the fact that sexuality is something that you cannot see physically, and that's why that you see that there is a lot of stereotypes being attached to this person, because from people who aren't in the minority may have a misunderstanding, and they cannot educate themselves when they don't even have they cannot even come in contact with these people because they are not exposed. There cannot be there are less meaningful discussion that can happen, right? Our solution is to make it accessible to everyone, and that's why we want to make sure that everyone can accurately identify each other's sexuality in this world. I have two arguments to bring this debate. My first argument is talking about how sexuality is an identity that you have to let out, because if you don't, then you fail in describing yourself, and it is going to be very harmful for the people who do that. We think that because sexuality is an identity, that means that it's going to transform into your behavior, into how you seek your spouse, into how you seek your partners. It will also be a part that is very divining towards your life. We see that it is also a big part of someone's life, right? So it's okay to let it be known, and even it can be very relieving for these people. So we want these people to not be feared, to not be scared of the judgment from society, because a lot of people are actually unable to come out because of the judgment that happened, right? That they are afraid to be shunned by their families. They are afraid that they are going to lose their friends if they come out, and just how maybe their family can kick them out of their house. We think that all of these are something that LGBTQ plus people experience on daily basis, right? Because they have to hide their identity, that they have to suppress themselves to society, to the point that where they have to pretend, and they become so unhappy and depressed that they cannot have a meaningful life because of this, because they feel like no one actually understand them, because they have to keep it a secret and stay closeted. That's why when we let this become known to everyone, when we let everyone to have an accurate gaydar, we think that when people don't have to pretend, they don't have to conform to the norm that society brings, and they will be generally happier in between. um, to the second argument, we think that people can be more understanding of each other when you make this knowledge accessible to everyone. Because now, imagine if I suddenly can know on whether someone is straight or someone is gay or lesbian. When you see that there is other people with the same sexuality as you, for example, this can makes the majority be able to understand minority better, because then you will see on how much is actually the percentage. You will see that the people who is around you is actually an LGBTQ plus person, because um, that other people around you is an LGBTQ plus person. so that you will see that maybe even public figures, even people around you, even your friends. So you will see, so there will be less judgment from society when you realize that your closest friends or family are actually LGBT. We think that this can be better for these LGBT people to get more support from their closest friends, right? Because the reason because when some people don't tell their sexuality to others, that means their existence remain unknown to some ignorant people, right? And we want these ignorant people to be able to educate themselves, and this cannot happen when they are not exposed with the concept of LGBT itself. We see on how in some conservative countries that the concept is so foreign that people don't even believe that kind of thing exists. Maybe even terms like being demisexual is probably also foreign on how even in the LGBTQ plus community, we see that there is even minorities in there that we need to talk about. We think that all of this is important for us to educate people, because we want members who are LGBT to show that they are LGBT, to show that to also speak up, to have to be the members that can educate also other people, to show that LGBT is not an illness, that it is not a sin, and that actually a lot of people who are successful, who become politicians, who are public figures, your family and friends, and are actually LGBT, and it's something okay. So it's actually going to debunk the narrative that, for example, LGBT is because you are exposed to conservative idea, that you are exposed to teachings that are against your religion. We think that this can debunk the stereotypes that happen. But even if that the opposition team want to say that this is actually something that something very private, and we should not force people to come out. We think that it is a worth it trade-off to give, because when they are forced to come out, then that is something that happened in status quo. But at least on our side of the house, that kind of fear will not exist, right? Because they can be who they are, they can truly express themselves. You don't have to suppress yourself to the point that it is really hurting your mental health and your stability in life. We think that this freedom is so important, because sexuality is something that really defines you, and we want people to feel comfortable in their own skin, to be able to live their life and enjoy it is in this world that is going to be not no longer very heteronormative, but for all other people to also see the other percentage that makes up the rest of population. That's why we on open government try to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prime Minister. I call upon the leader of the opposition.
Hello.
Hello.
My voice loud and clear?
Apa? Sorry.
Loud and clear.
Oh yeah, yes, you're loud and clear. Sorry.
Okay.
Maaf ya aksen teman gue emang.
QI through voice, please, and I use he pronouns. Government side has to be really careful with their characterization in this debate. If it is true that coming out is beneficial, why then do people still stay in the closet? That is a question that was never answered. I think government largely just assumed that people who don't come out are all unhappy, are all people who should actually come out. That's going to be very dangerous. That's going to cost them the debate. But let's clear out in what kind of context this debate actually happens in, right? Firstly, what we want to say is that the only fiat that government side can take is that everyone has perfect gaydars, right? What is not a fiat is people's judgment about LGBTQ people in the status quo, right? Because this motion suddenly happens and one day you wake up, you have a perfect gaydar, right? So that's to say that your parents, your bullies, people who judge you in the conservative society are still going to hate you for being different, for being gay, for being part of the minority, right? Even if you want to say that people are going to like, suddenly be conscious that the queer people are in the population, I think the data shows that only up to like 15% of the world currently is queer. So they're still going to be outnumbered by the majority. At the best case scenario, I think like it's going to be like the ratio of white people to black people is still that kind of oppression. But the second thing to clear out is that government's burden of proof is actually very big. It's that why people are not wise enough to decide what to do with their sexuality. So with that in mind, I have two arguments in my speech. All rebuttals will be integrated. First, why your sexuality should be in your control. Second, why this harms relationships as opposed to what opening government said, right? So the first argument, your sexuality should be in your control. So OG said that you're unhappy if you stay in the closet. Let's actually recharacterize and take a look why people choose to consciously stay in the closet, right? So a non-hetero person that is in the closet, irrespective of where they live, their decision to stay in the closet was a conscious and consented decision that they made to protect themselves. Sure, QI.
Do you think sexuality is fluid, or is it inherent when you were born with it?
Sexuality can be fluid. People change their sexuality over time. It's unexpected. Some people change when they're like 40 or something, right? I don't see what he's getting at. Okay, so the decision was a conscious decision that is made to protect themselves. For your career, for your family to stay intact, for example, or to keep a friendship, right? You don't want people to like lose faith in you, feel like they failed in, you know, keeping you very faithful and religious, for example, right? We think in all its instances, it's going to be a valid decision because it's a self-defense against judgment. And the importance of your sexuality is that it's something that's going to decide your life, right? It's going to be who you actually love, who you actually want to stay forever in life with. And sometimes, in most cases, when people are very closeted, it's about the people that they're planning to like run away and marry with someday, right? And they want to really keep it a secret. But when you violate that, you violate two principal things at the same time. The first is consent. The first is that you say that these people who are actually probably like people who are mature enough to understand that, you know, you can get some friends if you come out, for example. Like, I think these people already know the benefits, right? But the fact that they consented to stay in the closet means that they're unready. It means that they're, you know, unable to receive like the criticism or the changed judgment of themselves, like the literal different treatment that their friends take when they're at the gym, for example, when you're a boy and you just want to play with your friends and they suddenly know that you're gay. Now they're scared of even taking their shirts off in front of you, for example. You can't have fun with them, right? I think that violates their consent. But secondly, it also violates their self-defense. And this is the most important thing, because we think that the conscious decision to not come out is a defense against people's judgment. It is a defense against you, like a stranger down the street calling you out for being a sissy, for example, or calling you out for being like, you know, a sinner of the religion. Like, it's a decision so that when you go to church, you can still be faithful to your God, while actually you still want to be loved for being someone who is queer, for example, right? You don't want to be shamed by those people. And this applies even in government's best case. Like, you know, even in government's best case, where the reaction is going to be overwhelmingly positive, that means that you're still going to be pressured to be happy about it. While we have people who might still think that homosexuality is a sin, for example, although they cannot resist their gay thoughts, for example, they're still battling with themselves over their double identity, like being gay and being religious at the same time. We think this consent is a valid decision, and that these people are very vulnerable actors who can literally, like, you know, lose their whole identity and lose the way that they should interact in society once you violate that privacy. This is more important than any benefit, like, you know, being misgendered or misstereotyped or having broken love because you don't know what your crush's sexuality is. Like, because even though in the status quo, rape victims might feel catharsis if they talk to the wisest person on earth, we don't force them to, right? It's a conscious decision that should be protected. The importance of consent is that you consciously decided it's okay to miss out on the benefits, so it's okay to leave that out. What you didn't consent to are the millions and millions of possible harms that can come out of it. Second argument, this harms relationships. So government said that you'll get support because people realize that, oh, queer people exist. Okay, but empirically, there isn't that much queer people in the status quo right now. And empirically, in most part of the world, people do not accept queer people as they are. The most dangerous thing that's barring people from acceptance is that people think conversion therapy is something that is possible. Exactly. People think that your sexuality can be fluid, so people would want to force queer people to turn straight, for example, right? That means that you get things like, firstly, your family realizing this morning that you're gay, deciding that you shouldn't go to school today, but instead you should go to a conversion camp, because that is more important, because because like your sins, your faith is more important than your entire education, for example. Or they could kick you out, right? Because they realized that you were hiding that kind of thing, and you didn't tell them. The fact that you didn't tell them means that you consciously wanted to keep it a secret and run away from them someday, for example, right? That just creates even more harm than you regularly coming out even at the current status quo. But secondly, to your friends, for example, you lose the people who you trusted, like you lose your safe space because you currently didn't want to come out, but you plan to do it sometime later, for example, right? Even that means that you can lose the way that you interact. You're not ready to reform the way that you talk to them, for example. You could lose the meaningful moments in your life. And thirdly, even if your families and friends are supportive, you could expose these people to unwarranted harassment from strangers in the street, or even for celebrities. If OG wanted to talk about that, then that means their whole career could be over because of the overwhelmingly conservative strangers, which are the majority of the population currently, harassing them and saying that these people are against national values, for example, or that these people will destroy our morality because they are straying away from it, right? That means that you get overwhelmingly more harm likely because people think that sexuality can be changed. But even if these people resist it, and even if these people try to prove that their sexuality cannot be changed, we think that's a very hard decision that'll take a very long time. And the fact that there are too many people that are queer will just reinforce the bigger necessity for the conversion camps. We think people will just radicalize more. Proud to oppose.
Thanks very much, Leader of the Opposition. I call upon second Speaker of Opening Government.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I bought yung... Okay, wait. Guys, if you want a POI, just through chat because I'm afraid that nggak kedengaran soalnya lagi ada azan di sini.
Oh yeah. By the way, are you Iron Manning?
No. Oh no. Ini I'm with Gio right now.
Okay.
Gio Atma, not Gio Unpad.
Okay.
This is currently Ariel. Ariel Atma as well, not Ariel.
Okay.
Aduh, kocak banget sih.
You sound a little bit similar, so I'm not good.
Oh, okay. Aduh, kocak banget. Okay, I'm going to start my POI via chat ya guys, takut nggak kedengaran. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opening government still stands clear, right? Our goal here is we want to make a better world for these people who are identified as LGBTQ, right? Because currently in status quo, let's be honest, it is not that the case for us, right? Simply because we live in this heteronormative world, because that being gay is or being bi or anything is viewed as the wrong and everything, right? That's the main thing we want to change here, right? And I'm gonna extend later on that. But now let's take a look at on the opening opposition's case, right? Notice that the entire case is basically one line. It's basically if you go out, people will judge you. That is their entire case, just reworded many times here. So if I am able to prove to you that if you come out, this kind of judgment is not going to happen in our world where people's identities are immediately seen through our magical 100% accurate radar, it means the entire case is simply going to fall, right? So multiple responses on how they said that this kind of judgment will exist and regardless of this world, right? Let's talk about actually why coming out is needed in status quo, right? Because in this heteronormative world where heterosexual and straight white men are actually seen as the norm and as the ideal here in this world, judgment happens if you veer away from this norm. Norm, right? If you're gay, it means you're simply not according to what society wants. If you're bi, you're simply not what society wants, right? Which is why this kind of judgment happens if you actually do come out, right? But here, let's notice that we do not see the need for straight people to actually come out, right? And that's actually our goal here, right? We do not want the LGBTQ people to be any different from heterosexuals, that they need to have an extra step onto validating themselves by actually coming out, right? Which is why on our side here we want LGBTQ to also be this norm, and the only exclusive way for this to happen is for people to automatically already see them, or when you actually see a certain person, you can already tell whether they're gay, bi, straight, demi, and everything, right? That's how. So you don't have this kind of assumption whether they're straight or not. You can already tell. So there is no need for coming out to happen on our side. Because there is no this kind of norm on what straight actually is on our side, right? Which is why we believe this kind of judgment of if you're not actually straight is not going to actually happen on our side. But second thing, right? Why then when we actually override consent, people will actually not receive the condemnation of which is the only harm that the opening opposition have brought to us, right? Here we're going to actually portray to you what's going to happen if everyone knows, if everyone is actually out, when they're actually able to see that, well, as they portrayed, at least 50% of the world is the LGBTQ, right? You're able to see your friends and family be part of the LGBTQ LGBTQ community, or be also gay like you, or be bi as you, like that. You also get to see, example, like public figures. You're able to see everyone. What is this going to happen? What kind of impacts is going to happen? First is towards people who are LGBTQ themselves, right? They get validated. They get to see other people are also going to be like this. But most importantly, towards sorry, no POI. Sorry, at the moment. Especially this kind of thing is needed specifically for people who are maybe friends and family of those who are in the LGBTQ. They are able to see that, oh look, example, my child who just said he was gay is actually it is not a face for them, because I am able to see other people having the same things as well. Right? That's why support is automatically gonna come, because they're able to see everyone is also gonna be like that. This is why it's gonna be something normalized on our side of the house. And my last response is regarding about decision, right? About how they said that there are some people who are able, there are some people who chooses to stay in the closet and everything. But we believe that here, LGBTQ people's rational decisions actually clouded by pressure and fear, right? For many reasons. First, because they're afraid of judgment if they do come out, and second, there's already this internalized mindset that society actually hates you if you come out and everything, right? We believe that this kind of things clouds your actual judgment to be able to decide whether what's right or right. And we don't actually want them to have this kind of judgment clouding them, which is why when it's actually automatically for them to come out, we do not see this kind of harms happening on their side of the on our side of the house, right? When we've already proven to you that the entire case of judgment is not going to actually happen in our very beautiful gaydar world, we believe that the opposition's case has already fallen, right? So one extension I will bring in my case is regarding how this kind of successful gaydar is actually gonna bring better relationships and better relationships for the LGBTQ people, right? Let's talk about the obvious vulnerable actors here, which are the LGBTQ people themselves, right? They're also people. And as human beings, we need other people as social beings. We need communities, we need relationships, we need friends and families, and obviously we need sex partners, right? And that's actually something that is very important that I'm going to talk about, right? But in a status quo, status quo actually stops this from happening towards us in the LGBTQ community. First, because we are forced to hide ourselves in the heteronormative world, and second of all, because it's simply hard to find another person who is maybe has the same sexuality as me and has the same interest as me, because simply a lot of us we do not know what the other person's identities are, right? So the solution we're gonna provide here is when everyone automatically knows, this kind of problems won't happen. I'm gonna explain this in two layers. First, on the layer of support groups and communities, right? Let's talk about how LGBTQ plus communities is very important towards LGBTQ members, right? You're able to find people who are the same as you. You're able to find people who has the same beliefs as you, that, you know what, being bi is a good thing, being gay is a good thing, right? And there are other people who also are like me, right? So it gives me this kind of validation, right? Especially in this especially when it's so important for us to find, as the minorities, to find people alike of us, so we can have strength in numbers, right? This is only going to be clear on our side of the house, right? When you're able to see everyone's identity, when you're able to look at them and like, oh, they're bi like me too, it can also allow us to be able to interact with them more freely. We're able to build these communities better, and it's not going to be only online. Example, in Jakarta, when you're in our very heteronormative city, right? We can actually be able to see, example, our neighbors are also gay and everything, right? So that's why communities on our side is going to be better. It's going to allow us to be comforted and validated, which is obviously very important for us, as any other human beings need to be comforted and validated as well, right? But onto my second layer regarding relationships, right? Regarding about how we actually also want to find people who we want to get married with. We also want to find people we want to have sex with, and people we want to have a romantic relationships live the rest of our lives here, right? Here, when we're actually able to find those with whose sexualities match and align with ours, it is easier for us to actually find our soulmates. It is easier for us to actually find who we want to spend the rest of our lives with, right? So because we don't have to second guess ourselves, we don't have to think, oh, are they gay? We don't have to play the guessing game of, are they gay or straight? Do they like me back, or are they just really friendly and everything, right? That's not going to happen, simply because you can already, oh, this person I like is actually bi. I can just approach them. I don't have to have this kind of fear. And that kind of thing is what is going to be exclusive on our side of the house, which is why we strongly propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. I call upon Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Okay. My POI preference is no POI, but if you insist on having POI, just unmute yourself because I cannot see the chat. Although I cannot promise to take it because promise is a sin by Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What you need to notice is that this motion is not a clean slate debate per se, right? Because this motion specifically said is starting from today, right? So therefore, I think that it is after you wake up in the morning tomorrow, you're going to see that Santo is actually blank. For example, I don't want to like misidentify your sexuality, but like this is just an example, right? So what I'm trying to say is that a clean slate debate where like Adam and Eve can we're starting from Adam and Eve can identify other sexuality and it continues throughout the generations. But I think it happens today when the current judgment still exists and that in tomorrow, even if you can identify each other's sexuality, the norm of that judgment, the norm of that stigma will still exist, will still are instilled in that brain and cannot be erased that easily by people, right? So that's why I don't see any mechanization coming from opening governments on why then the fear of on why then the judgment that's going to be instilled to these people who are going to be forced to actually come out to their parents who still have this judgment of who still have judgment of gay people because they are Trump supporters, for example, will going to be like erased in their side of the house, right? Exactly when they say that they are actually come out they are unable to come out in status quo because of fear of judgment. I think exactly you force them to face that judgment in the end of the day. I don't think that this is something that is actually won by individuals, right? But the way they rebutted this idea coming from Jan was that say that the support will come because your parents will see that it is just not a phase, right? That exactly what actually one rebuttal coming from the South House, right? I think this is dismissive because the idea that Jen has already told you is that conversion therapy exists exactly because of that. Because I think that conservative people don't neglect gay as a sexuality, but they accept that gay is a passing sexuality, right? So your proposal will not going to change part of their mindset, right? Even if they can identify that you are gay as a parent, you see that this is a passing sexuality. That sexuality can change. But if we can actually like ruqyah them, they actually can go back to straight, right? They can love women and whatnot. This is why then the rebuttal does not make sense. But they say that this is two arguments that doesn't make sense to me. Because number one, they say that LGBT recognize need community and they need sexual partner, and secondly is that public figure they were going to be like they were going to like blatantly accept sexuality and sexual minorities because turns out public figures or like artists are actually part of LGBT either. On that argument of LGBT and community and sexual partner, I don't see how they differentiate to status quo, because I think LGBT is a community is because they exist as a community. So therefore, why then in outside the house LGBT is actually does not exist. But secondly is that the need of sexual partner, I think Grindr exists, ladies and gentlemen. I think that most of you guys already know Grindr. I think some of you guys already access Grindr. I think why then this is actually exclusive in the side of the house. But on the idea of public figures actually part of on the idea of relatability because public figures is actually part of LGBT, right? I think this also exists in status quo. Like politicians right now, like Pete Buttigieg is also exists, and they don't and sexual and gay people in US are still being discriminated at harsh. I think RuPaul as a public figures actually also exists, right? So I think the idea of relatability is parallel on both sides of the house. They need to make us on the exclusivity of that. But this is the most hilarious one, because they said forced to come out happens in status quo, the way they actually like try to thread off and whatnot. I don't why in status quo like they are forced to come out, they don't like mechanize on that. But secondly is that the freedom is because like the freedom is so important, it outweighs the harm. But like how you can actually as a LGBT community can guarantee that they can actually access that freedom, because notice that Jen has already been pretty clear on this, that not everyone is privileged to see their identity got exposed worldwide and still can live comfortably. Some individuals in developing countries are still being tortured, are still being pacung daily, and they're being exercised morally by their own parents just because they are gay, right? So I don't see why then they can actually access that freedom in the end of the day, right? That is why we say that in comparison, when you actually can come out by your own time, it's actually important. But why it is actually important? Two things. Number one on individual level, but secondly on the others level, right? So I'm going to like deconstruct why conditional time to actually come out is important in comparison to in those at the house, they're going to be forced to come out in the next morning, right? Number one, for individual, I think that the harm that you're going to impose to this individual is that you're going to lose your grasp and control of your own identity. The reasons why coming out is so empowering is that you expose your part of identity, but still able to hold control of it. Especially when people, in the end of the day, actually accept you, right? That is why, like, that is why this emotional benefit, that this empowerment will going to go in inside the house the moment when you actually, like, instead of you actually having your own ability to come out, having your own words and your own framing of why actually started to come out, is actually gone, right? People just instantly knows you, and this is not this is not empowering. Like, that is why, that is why, for example, the moment when actually people outed other people in social media are being so cancelled, because this is harming the individual, right? Even like when actually, like, people actually accept that people when accept this individual when they are being outed by other people, this individual that are being outed does not see that much benefit, because it does not see that this is actually that empowering, right? Because, like, the only way for them to actually being they feel that they, when they actually being outed by other people, it's actually because the other people actually outed them, and not themselves are actually outing themselves, right? That is how, like, this going to lose your grasp and your control of your identity. But for others though, why conditional time is important? Because most often times in status quo, people come out gradually instead of publicly. They want to come out to their closest friends because they know them the most, and probably you don't want to raise a relationship with your parents. But secondly, most importantly, you probably you need to see the safest scenario or gateway where they don't stress as much and they don't get irrational when we lay down the news, right? That is why, for example, like, when that is the likelihood of people to actually being pacung is actually important. It actually happens because because they're irrational because they irrational and they get hasty decision, and they drive them to this rukiah place, right? But the moment you actually get your own wording on how you can lay down the news, and you lay down the wording of the preemptives and whatnot of, oh, hey, I'm actually gay, but actually this is my own choices, and this is actually my own identity. This is how you actually minimize the risk of these people getting irrational, or these parents getting irrational and driving you to rukiah and whatnot, right? But in your side of the house is that these parents will going to open your room and see that, hey, my son is actually gay, and this is how this is how they wreck their world getting wrecked, right? This is how they get irrational, and this is how they get your own children to get rukiah. I don't want my own parents to actually drive me to rukiah because of this. Very proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you very much, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. I call upon the first speaker from the closing team, member of government.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, for POIs, prefers that you guys mute yourself. I'll be accepting POI in the middle of my speech. Give me a second. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think what's missing in this debate is an actual change, because the reason why discrimination still happen until to this day to those who are inside of the LGBTQ plus community is because there's no systemic change, because there's no systemic protection to these people, because there's no systemic liability to actually hold the people who are in fault of discriminating them to jail, for example, or giving them sanctions. And this is what CG will bring to you, because what OG brought to you was just some simplistic idea that people will suddenly be educated and will love LGBTQ plus community, and OO simply brought that you will not be accepted by your family and so on. Very micro, very small change. I'm going to talk about 3 things. Firstly, the prerequisite of any argument in this debate, which is knowing who to protect in this debate. Secondly, things like personal fulfillment that OG brought to you. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about creating change by education and dismantling discrimination and so on with science and whatnot. First thing, the prerequisite of any argument in this debate, which is our extension, that knowing who to protect. I think this is very important because in opposition's world, coming out is a privilege. Even if you're still discriminated, the fact that you have the strength to come out and say that you are in the part of this marginalized community means there's a form of protection or security that you get. Things like your friends are liberals or your family is actually fine. They're probably religious, but they don't actually care about your sexuality, for example. Why is this problematic? That means help will only exist, or support like institutions and or the community only exists in places that has huge demography of people who is coming out. For example, Indonesia, there's a lot of people who are coming out in Jaksel, but in Kalimantan or in Papua, you probably don't know how much people who are gay or lesbians because they don't simply come out. That means help only exists in Jaksel, for example, and don't exist in Papua exactly because you don't know who to help when you are not coming out. Why? This is problematic. That means that the community that the OO is talking about is really like fragile and it's underground. That means even if there's a community in Papua that has a lot of people that are not coming out or they are like a part of the LGBT plus community, that means they are easily like attacked by people who are extremely religious, for example. This is problematic because this will continue to exist exactly because you are too scared to come out in the first place. In our world, exactly because it's accurately identified, means that you know the demography of people or the lesbians or gays and whatnot to actually be targeted by institutions like LBH in Jakarta, for example, to actually create policy. For example, you can create a data on how much gay people are in Jakarta, for example, or in America, or in conservative places. This is really useful. Why? Because in our world right now, this does not exist. And why this is helpful in the new world is now you can accurately give support to people who need it the most. For example, you give it to the conservative country Indonesia. That means that the US people should not like just focus on like the liberals, for example, and help. No, thank you. Helping people in like religious communities and whatnot. Worst case scenario, when the entire conservative realm collectively hurt each other, like what's happening in Aceh. Firstly, that means that proves to you, for example, if no, thank you, this happens in Indonesia, that means other countries who are more liberals, like the US or the Western, can actually give them an economic sanctions. Like you are violating the literally human rights and your people uncontrollable. Please handle them and whatnot. That means the government will most likely try to mitigate this as possible, like creating policy changes, trying to protect the LGBTQ plus community, because international relations are apparently important for countries to have relations with the US and whatnot, right? But moreover, I guess the biggest link back to this is that knowing who to protect is the most important thing right now because this does not exist in our world and it can only happen with this motion. Before that, yes.
People couldn't choose to be born in a conservative society. Don't you think they should at least be able to choose what to do with their identity? Why are they responsible to sacrifice their identity to fix that conservative society?
The problem is, in your side of the house, they have no option. Even if they really want to come out, for example, they will be not protected. In our world, you're like they're outright. Therefore, institutions are more likely to help you. There are social movements that are getting bigger that will most likely going to help you. Moreover, the fact that the social movement right now is getting so much bigger is because more people are coming out. Imagine if the entire world knows that there are 50% of the people are actually gay or trans, for example, then most likely what's going to happen, the change is going to be bigger as people know that they are actually the part of the movement, because sometimes we don't know actually whether or not we are like what our sexuality are. That's why we like experiment with those things and stuff. Second thing, I'm going to talk about personal fulfillment that's taught by OG because this is simply simplify, right? I'm going to talk about three things: liberation, empowerment, and fulfillment. Firstly, liberation. I think this is what's most important because you don't have to worry about your sexual coming out anymore when you can actually think about how you can liberate yourself from your community, like looking for social movements that around your area or looking for institutions like LBH or area to actually help you and get law liability and whatnot to actually get you out of your toxic family or toxic relationship, right? This means that you can buy plane tickets to get out and to find places that are safer for you, knowing that there's a demography of more gay people in Jaksel, for example, or in Bali and whatnot. But secondly, on empowerment, I think all taught you about how you get empowerment from coming out. I think this is true to certain extent and will explain. But CG thinks that empowerment happens when you create systemic change, when you don't have to worry about being discriminated anymore. And this is what happens in our side of the house, because you know that the majority of people are not heterosexuals anymore. But even if the majority of people are heterosexual anymore, this goes to my third issue, which is creating change. Because now science have bigger ability to actually have bigger variables of people to actually create social experiments, for example, like whether or not sexuality is fluid, because this is still debatable scientifically, right? So you cannot identify whether or not this is from your environment. When we are able to prove, for example, that sexuality is not fluid and you're like gay from when you're born, this is going to be a huge revelation. This is going to help the entire education curriculum to say that you should not discriminate people who have different sexualities because they are simply born like that. That's why there's campaigns, hashtag born like that, born this way, whatever. But secondly, even if it is proven that the sexuality is fluid, I think this will be helpful. Why? Because in the future, we can like mitigate kinds of things, like mitigate the creation of like camps, concentration camps and whatnot existing in like conservative countries, exactly knowing because it's fluid how we can mitigate that from happening. We're so proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much, member of government. To open the case of closing op, I call upon member of the opposition.
Sorry, wait, starting my timer. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So at the opening bench, when they said that they want to educate the people, but we believe that in what we are discussing, what we are discussing in this motion today, that it is starting from today, that we think it is not ready at all for our society that is very very conservative. In here, we closing government, we give you the why that even if they are see people LGBTQ plus, they still can be the judgmental, even if when we see all each other's sexuality, that our society will still judgmental towards this person. So we believe why the society is not ready enough, because the education itself is not being taken by our society, and we believe that we prefer that we prefer that we educate these people rather than we just prefer this world where starting from tomorrow that every humans starting from today that every humans on earth is able to accurately identify each other's sexuality. So in here, when they said that there will be a support group and community, we believe that it is not exclusive at all, because in our status quo right now, that LGBTQ plus still have those benefits, right? We still the LGBTQ still can go to the group or community that they want, but the difference with this world is the people who in our status quo right now, the people who want to join the community is want to show themselves, and then and this person, and in the other world that they will be being forced by the situation. And in here, that's why we believe that we see we see there is no urgency at all that we need to give to prefer this world. So let's go to my argument that why actually this proposal is not, this narrative is not really good for our status quo right now, because our conservative society. So our stand in here is we believe we prefer we prefer to not see each other sexuality, because we want the safety of the vulnerable actor, that is the LGBTQ plus community. And then why we see that we want to tell you that how the conservative society is still there, and how it's still not being progressive at all. It's progress it's kind of progressive in our status quo right now, but still there is still the conservative society is still there, right? It's because it is not aligned with a norm and also the religion that is exists in in our world right now, right? For example, when we already see how religion is really have a bad perception of this LGBTQ, and we believe that how our world work is the religion is like the basic principle of the humans of the people's life, right? So we believe that when this religion is accessed, and then also the everything that being taught by the religion is followed by the followers itself, it will be it will still there is still a perception that the LGBTQ plus is still bad, and that's why the judgment is still there. So the best way to make people understand that there is a person who born with the LGBTQ is we believe that it is by the education itself, not by showing the world that they are a person who have who born with the each other's sexuality, seeing them like in like this word like what that we see that accurately identify each other's sexuality. And we believe that how we prefer our world right now is because when this motion is being when this world is being applied to our world right now, it will we see that how hard the life of the LGBTQ plus if their sexuality is being exposed. That starting today, first you will lose a friends, and even very hard to make a new friends, because it's because it is like because we see that we see that our society is still not accept this there is no acceptance for the society, right? And then also you even very hard to go you even so hard even to go to pray to the church or the mosque, and then also you hard to get a job too because this judgment. And also let's see the comparison. If we just stay in our status quo right now, uh, how what happened is LGBTQ plus still can be themselves, still can be with their sexuality. They can love the person that they love, and they still go anywhere without being afraid, without being accepted, and they can live happily. But let's see on the other side, when we starting tomorrow, people can know you are different with others. It will make you and then you realize that you realize that your society will not accept of yourself. uh, you will very afraid to go out, and then also you are very shame, and then also you didn't even want to go to school, for example. And you know that there is still debatable if a person can change their sexuality or not, especially for the conservative society, that they still think that people could change their sexuality. And this LGBTQ plus person is trying to be accepted by the society, so they're trying to be strict, for example. And because they're trying to change themselves, and they want to be accepted, they want to be suitable for the society, they cannot love themselves as a person that is different. They cannot be a person as they are, so they cannot we think that they cannot live happily, even if that they can be a strike. We believe that it's still not really good for them, because there is still a depression for them to change themselves to be a person that they didn't want. So even so the best scenario is when they can change for their sexuality, for example. But if they are not, and there's the depression is still there, right? They still really close themselves to others, because they think that they are different, and they are in the conservative society. So that's why when we compare to our world, when people when the LGBTQ can be themselves, and then it can hiding with their sexuality, we believe that it is safe. It is more safe uh, than the world than the world that we discussed today, because panel noticed that when we are talking about a world that's starting from today. So I think that's all. Thank
Okay, thank you very much, member of the opposition. I call upon the last speaker of the government, Government Whip.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Okay. Manifesting Lucia power. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. By CO's logic, if religion says that gay people are immoral and that your biases makes people think that women are inferior, then we shouldn't do anything about it. I think that's nonsense in the sense that I think what they needed to prove in this debate was why religion, which again is the only unique thing coming from CO, was the thing that is so entrenched that you possibly cannot reform these ideals. Like obviously society progresses over time. I think what we have to do under CG is that you accelerate that progress. They never really engage with our case. CG is the first team to sidestep the mess that is the opening half. We told you why, like for example, in terms of micro levels, that's probably going to be very different for a lot of individuals and those benefits are uncertain. What is certain though is the macro changes that you get on our side when we're able to correctly identify who you need to help, who you are able to protect under our side of the house. Very proud to win on CG. I'm going to talk about 3 things in my speech. First, on personal fulfillment, like opening half debate. Second, on interactions and discriminations, also opening half debate. Thirdly, on macro changes that like was never engaged to by CO, probably still stands by the end of this debate, and you'll realize that this probably outframes the entirety of opening debate anyway. The first thing I want to point out though, before I go on to anything, is that CO is very derivative. I think along the way, I'll tackle CO along with OO and show why we win. First, on personal fulfillment, I think OO brings 2 things here, right? The first is on consent, second on self-defense, very simplistic claims. The first is on consent. I think what Rachel puts to you is that we probably want to trade off consent all the time when you get things like social change, right? The thing like you probably have, for example, if you are a terrorist, for example, we probably trade off consent and your privacy to some extent for a greater moral good. Like in democracies, you trade off consent to be represented and have someone make decisions on your behalf. But secondly, I think what our extension crucially shows is how you're able to access that consent and exert your agency better on our side of the house. Because when you are more protected, for example, that's when you're able to access the choices that you have. For example, when you're able to get a job and you get a job guarantee and you get money, that's when you're able to have a greater amount of agency when you are, for example, away from that conservative society because a social movement brought you away to another country. The second thing they want to talk about is on self-defense. And I want to point out here that ultimately, this is very, very dependent on any practical benefits you achieve. Because I think OO would concede that it's probably better to live in a world where you don't have to come out. Presumably, you want to make that progress where you don't have to come out and where people don't discriminate you to a great extent, where you don't feel the emotional burden of not coming out. I think you probably want that as an LGBT individual. So I think what OO needed to prove is not just that this protects individuals right now. It's unclear to me why that will change over time. As long as we've proven to you that we get no thank you, some like manifestation of benefit, that's probably a much more greater benefit than this like principle nebulous claim about self-defense. The thing that I want to point out is this very, very implicit response from OO in a POI that says like, they should not sacrifice them, like their rights or whatever, like their safety to help society. The first thing to point out is that this is probably what an individual will want. As long as we prove to you that you're able to exert those rights better and exert your agency better in a society where you are able to empathize with other individuals, that is where like I think individuals can sacrifice these things and we can make these choices for those individuals. I want to point out some slightly new material from CO, if I can call it that, right? They talk about how you are will become emotionally burdened and you'll become depressed because you want to conform to society, even like when society points out that you're not there, right? That you're not heterosexual, for example. I want to say that this is probably symmetric because there's always an internal bias of you wanting to conform. I think when you are an LGBT individual, I think you still have those internalized biases that says being gay is bad. I think what happens then, and the thing to break this deadlock is where you're able to like escape that conservative society, right? I want to point out then our important contribution because OG just says that, oh, this is very important for empowerment and validation or whatever. I think my partner's extension, Emily, sidesteps this in many ways by saying that this is the emotional burden of you having to think about your coming out, having to overthink the scenarios that you go over in your head. No, thank you. Second thing I want to talk about is interactions and discriminations. OO brings a very similar claim as to why, oh, you're going to lose friends and lose families. Like their argument was literally say that you lose your safe space. Yeah, the current safe space you have, if it's homophobic, is probably bad for your mental health to begin with. Like if they make like homophobic jokes and you're still in that circle, I think you liberate individuals when they're able to find a new safe space, right? There are safe space on our side when you're able to identify each other. I think the tepid response that we get from OO and CO is that, there are communities that already exist. There are dating apps, right? This might be true, but notice the effectivity of these communities. That's why in Indonesia, for example, they have a very small gay community, but they like probably don't like band together like the majority of instances anyway. Like, you probably stay underground still. I think what we uniquely do underside government is that you show that this is probably the majority of people, that a good percentage of the population is probably of a different sexuality, because yeah, the only other sexuality isn't just homosexual. There are lots of sexualities. And as OO pointed out themselves, if sexuality is fluid, then I think like even like your teacher at school can probably be of a different sexuality, right? This is where our extension comes into play though, because we're able to tell you why social movements are more empowered on our side when you're able to have things such as identification of which conservative societies and which conservative people should be helped. So you can have things like targeted programs for LGBT youth. This also takes out CEO's concern about having no jobs. That's our argument, because you don't have those safety nets right now when you don't identify where the people actually are. That's where you don't have job guarantees. So because like you don't have the affirmative action that exists. The contribution that we gave to you from Emily, and again, this wasn't rebutted by CEO at all, was on sides, right? The problem is that discrimination happens under your side of the house when individuals can self-justify by saying like, oh, you want to cave into your internal biases. I think what we do under our side is that you're able to identify a lot of people. You can like have scientific research on why sexuality and different variations exist, whether or not it's like a natural selection thing, thank God, or you need that data and you need that visibility, right? So that's what happens under our side of the house when we are able to have that sort of conclusive proof to fight back against the biases that exist under their side of the house. The last thing to say is on macro changes. I posit to you, we can totally win this debate, right? On this point alone. Because if it is true that individuals live in very oppressive governments under OO and CO, that's where you change it under our side when, for example, big governments around the world who are more liberal, who want to keep their PR image like the US, can now pressure Indonesia, for example, to show off the human rights violations to LGBT individuals. And that only happens when you're able to say that 50% of the Indonesian population is probably LGBT under their side of the house. That's where oppressive governments can be checked by others, because the discrimination becomes more visible. That's why, for example, governments are able to pressure Myanmar for discrimination of the Rohingya. That's where you get internet activism and you get help towards those areas. I want to point out that yes, OO cannot get away with the tepid response that people should not be social battering rams. We've already proven to you why you trade it off, but why this is in the best interest of the individual when they're able to access and consent over the rest of their lives, as opposed to staying forever closeted and staying forever not being able to access who you truly are very proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much, Government Whip. I call upon the last speaker of this debate, Opposition Whip.
Hi, you guys timing?
Yes, I am. Tapi bentar ya, ada chat mendadak.
Okay.
Op Whip, you may start ya.
Okay, thank you. You guys have the bell, right?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Oh, you don't have the bell. Oh, you don't. All right. Okay. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Judge, the government assumes that we all live in America, the land of the free, where people don't invite drag queens to their 17th birthday parties just to laugh or run away from them. They assume that we all live in Western liberal countries that are more likely to be aware of and more accepting towards the LGBT plus community, and that literally every predominantly homophobic country in Asia does not exist. They don't understand that we aren't just talking about America, where there are probably lots of closeted people, and in that case, then this automatic gaydar would at least not harm anyone, because like there are larger numbers of people who turn out to be LGBT, like let's say the opposition said, like 50% of people are gay or something like that. But that's not always the case in other areas. There are two things I want to talk about. Firstly, the risk that the abrupt timing poses towards closeted LGBT people, and secondly, how systemic change can be done by literally anything else and not just automatic gaydar. So the first thing I want to talk about is that the risk that the abrupt timing, aka you have a gaydar starting today, literally today, that poses a risk towards closeted LGBT people. So first of all, I want to talk about how you're literally coming out today. There's no preparation, there's no let's say movement beforehand for to get people to want to be on your side, especially if you're like in countries such as Indonesia, or in your countries such as Korea, you're in countries such as you're in like homophobic Asian countries essentially, right? Like those kinds of countries, you don't actually know whether or not 50% of the people are gay. In fact, I'm pretty sure because it's so homophobic in these countries, people just don't want to be gay at all. So like there's quite a small amount of people who are gay anyway, right? And so then if there's a small amount of people who are gay anyway, they still become the minority, and then you just expose them. Like so you don't like have a prior social movement, you don't have a prior like, let's say social awareness campaign or something like that. You literally push them straight into the spotlight, and that puts them at risk because they are in a place where they're not safe from the people around them. They're not safe from judgmental eyes. They're not safe from, let's say, getting sacked. I literally this morning, my university, I'm not going to name my university, but my university almost fired someone from one of our events because they found out that they were gay. And that literally shows how bad the homophobia is in countries such as this. Even if like, even if you want to say like oh, but like it's better for us then to have everyone come out, but the thing is, what we're saying is that the timing is not exactly convenient for them to come out straight away today. They're not prepared. They're not like, prepared to like get fired. They're not prepared to fight against like, the majority that are going to judge them, and they're not prepared to well, basically cause an uprising or something like that, right? The next thing that I want to talk about is how we're in like let's talk about like countries that are overly religious, like let's say Arab, or like I'm not even going to talk about Arab because I don't know much about it, but let's talk about somewhere close, Aceh. If you are like, if they find out like someone is gay there, I'm pretty sure what would happen is they would either like go to jail, get caned, or even like get, I don't know, sentenced to death. I don't know how bad it is there, but I'm pretty sure it's bad. And so if you put that, if you like if you put the closeted people in the spotlight today, and like, without any like, preparation, without any safety net for these people, then obviously what you're doing is you're massacring, whether literally or just socially, a bunch of people who weren't ready, and they had to sacrifice their own lives. No, thank you. They had to sacrifice their own lives just because you wanted systemic change that could come in other ways that you wouldn't need to hurt these people in the first place, right? So the second thing I want to talk about is how systemic change that the government keeps on raving about is can be done by literally anything else and not just this automatic gaydar. So what we want to talk about is that there are other campaigns that like, you could that you could do, that you don't have to like, you don't have to expose every single person who is gay, because if you expose every single person that is gay, again, what could happen is like, things that I have already explained in the first thing that I talked about, right? No, thank you. But if on our side of the house, if you do like, let's say, campaigns, then those campaigns are usually done by people who have already come out, people who are already willing to, people who have already consented to other people knowing that they are gay. And so then they're already emotionally ready. They know the risks. They are already ready, and maybe already have a safety net as well, to face the hatred, or no thank you, or to face the majority that are going to probably hate on them, right? And so these campaigns are still better than like, than pushing those like, closeted people into the spotlight, especially because they probably don't know what to do either, because they haven't really been in a campaign. They haven't like thought about coming out. They haven't thought of like, a world where they would be out and proud, right? And so they're not prepared for that. And so it'd be better for us to just like give the wheel to those who are already prepared, right? Because those campaigns will at least not hurt the people who are like, willing to take that fall, because again, they are willing to take that fall, and they're not going to like, they're not going to get as hurt as like, the people who did not expect anything to happen to them, especially because they stayed closeted for a reason, right? And so we think that we think that the government is extremely ignorant to this fact, and we think that it'd be way better for us to keep to stay closeted in general, if you want to stay closeted, and if you want to like come out, then sure, you can come out. But if you force people to come out, especially in areas where you can literally get killed or kidnapped or whatever, for being gay, or you can get fired, or like you can face like societal judgment for that, and you're not ready for that because of the timing, then we think that that's absolutely immoral, and that doesn't help at all, because it ends up with it's just like a basically a massacre. I don't know what other word I can use for that, and so that is why we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Upwip. I will now make my decision. Mungkin decisionnya agak lama ya. I don't want to do it too fast. So thank you guys. I think the debate is interesting. I give first to the opening opposition, second to closing government, third to opening government, fourth to closing opposition. With the opening government and closing government is so close, okay? Kayak I wasted the last 15 minutes kayaknya. Open antara Oji sama CG, okay? Okay, the reason why I give closing opposition first. So I'm going to compare closing opposition to the opening first. I think closing opposition mainly sets the debate in the most conservative countries, in which people can be massacred to death. For example, when they live in Aceh, for example, when they live in conservative areas, and there exists a pressure for you not to be homosexual, and homosexual will be like completely shunned away from by the community. I think this is a valid argument, and of course, this is a harmful thing. Obviously, I won't deny the harm. But in comparison to the opening opposition, I think it's quite derivative, because this is included in the opening opposition's case, especially the second speaker when Dio says about pasung or pacung, yeah, people in Aceh, they are like punished to death, for example, or like they're being tortured. Not only that, I feel like opening opposition gave better case regarding this, because opening opposition also mentions the harm in the moderate scenarios. For example, even if there are still, even if these people are not like in conservative areas, for example, they are in the developed countries, religion, the existence of religion are still so conservative, even in the most liberal state. They have to have their personal dilemma about how they want to integrate their religious identity also with their gay identity, and the irrational fear that right now you're exposed when you're not ready at all really harms them, because it makes them like so stressed out. This harms exist without these people having to live in conservative areas, right? These talks about more moderate case harms. So I feel like in terms of harms, I feel like opening opposition has a better contribution comparison to closing opposition. Moreover, I think let's talk about your responses. So I feel like the responses from closing opposition in regards to the government team remains the same. For example, when member of the opposition tries to rebut by saying that the community argument in opening government is not exclusive, because we also have gay community. I feel like opening opposition talks literally the same line. And moreover, I feel like deputy leader of the opposition also brings very relatable examples, such as Grindr and other things, for example. I feel like there are many rooms to explore this response. But I feel like closing opposition did not like go out of the original response from the opening. There is a bit of response, I think, to closing government's extension about structural change, in which opposition whip says that there are changes that can happen without the existence of like this new world, right? So basically, OpWhip says that structural change on your side is more preferable. But how do you explain this? Number one, I don't you don't specify what are the mechanisms for in opposition to reach that structural change, which I think could have been your contribution as a closing op, but you didn't really specify and mechanize what are the changes that you can make and why these changes can still happen without the direct visibility of the gay people, for example. And so, and secondly, the way you try to say why this changes is actually better is because you say that their changes is actually harmful because their changes actually leads to like harmful judgments to people that don't consent to them being exposed, which I think it's contingent to the opening opposition's case. Okay, so I really cannot value this framing because this framing uses an important substance from the opening opposition. That's why I feel like in terms of responses, you also cannot get above both the opening government and closing government. So that's why closing opposition got fourth. Let's talk about opening opposition first. I'm going to compare opening opposition between opening government first. In conclusion, opening opposition wins because opening government talks about this new world will be an avenue for people to be liberated so that they are fully accepted. And acceptance can eventually happen inside government because there is visibility. People know that even politicians are gay, and this is something become normalized in society. Opening opposition talks about the possible judgments that might exist, and opening government cannot fiat acceptance from society because starting from today, people have already like made some norms in regards to homosexuality, and this is something that's still shunned by the people, by like the larger scale of society. So I feel like there is a deadlock between what the world is going to look like between the opening debate, because opening government cannot cannot guarantee the existence of this normalization because of this visibility. Opening opposition also cannot prove why people will not leave their current norms when they see this phenomenon in which they, after they have had this very accurate gaydar. So the tipping point of the opening debate is the urgency, because I feel like opening opposition brings more urgency to the table by saying that society's stigma can still be harmful, even though it's not as bad. We actually create irrational fear, especially to the homosexuals that are not ready to come out. And in the worst cases, they can be canceled, they can be left by their friends, and they feel some sort of being left behind and being ostracized by their friends. Because right now, people know who they are, and in some more worst case scenarios, they can be kicked out by their parents. I feel like this is an urgent harm that is very harmful, obviously, for the gay people, right? Opening government, however, never talks what is the urgency for these people to come out. Okay, so what is the harm of these people not being able to come out, and why staying in the closet is so harmful for whatever reason it is? Because opening opposition kind of says that even if these people don't have to come out, that's fine. That's a perfect option if they could live that way. So I feel like the first tipping point is the urgency, and I feel like opening opposition's argument brings more urgency to the table. Second tipping point is about which world caters to the interest of the most vulnerable individual better. Because opening clearly identifies that we are talking about the same vulnerable actor, which are the LGBT themselves. And opening opposition provides an explanation saying that if it's true that in the context that they are no longer discriminated, they would have come out anyway, and this wouldn't have been a problem for them. And it's much better for them to have these options and to decide for themselves whether or not it's better for them to come out or not. Okay, opening government did not explain why they are not able to make these choices. Why in most scenarios, these people would be better off to come out, but their irrational fear blocks them from coming out, and why this is necessarily the case for these LGBTQ themselves. I feel like opening opposition protects the interests of these people better in comparison to the opening government. Let's talk about the second argument from the opening government. I think the argument is very good. It's about how people would like to collectivize, and people know who are gay, and people know who to like be friend with, and people who know how what type of people they want to like approach for romantic partners. However, I feel like you're so dismissive to the comparative right now in which gay communities exist and like gay digital app exists, and you don't preemptively tackle why is the status quo or in opposition it is like so worse. It is like not an ideal alternative, and we have to urgently change that. Okay, so I feel like your argument from the second speaker is not able to make opening government triumph over like the personal fulfillment argument from the opening opposition. That's why opening op triumphs over opening government. Let's talk about opening opposition versus closing government. So closing government talks about structural change, and the type of structural change will exist by making it more visible in the status quo. And states will address, or like whoever the actors are, will address the problem of LGBTQ and address their discriminations. So structural change is a jargon, right? So I'm gonna talk about I'm gonna like basically assume educatedly why what are the structural change that closing government wants to have. So firstly is the affirmative actions to gay people. Right? For example, affirmative actions so that the gay people in developing countries, I assume, or like the people who are the people in like conservative areas, have their rights protected. And what are the examples of the right? It's about the people will be guaranteed job, like anti-discrimination law from being fired because of their sexuality. Now, the issue of this affirmative action argument is that I'm not sure that gay people, the ones that don't come out, currently have that issues, because if it's true that they are faced by anti-gay laws, they wouldn't have been persecuted if they hadn't come out in the first place, right? And obviously you talk about the context in which most people don't come out because it's too conservative. So I don't think the persecution of like them not being denied for their jobs or for whatever application it is doesn't really stand, especially when opening opposition has given some mechanism saying that not coming out is already an option in the first place, and it kind of guarantees their survival. So I don't think this affirmative action argument becomes so urgent. And number two, you also talk about that you want to relocate people to more gay-friendly areas, for example, in Jaksel, right? I'm not sure if that's what you mean, but if that's what you mean, I also don't understand why this is necessary for them, especially the ones who don't come out yet in these conservative areas, because they're not prosecuted at all currently. Okay, so basically the problem with this structural change argument is that you talk about policy in which the people you want to protect are the people who have come out, right? Because it is when the society can persecute them. However, you also talk in the conservative, you also talk in the setting of conservative areas. Opening opposition talks about these are the people who would most likely not come out. So that's basically my problem with your policy, closing government. But even if I have to assume that these are like structural changes that are important, however, I don't think you don't mechanize the structural change really well, because you only talk about that the state will be pressurized to address all of these problems because there's international pressure, because this will be a human right violation records that are so visible. But I'm also not sure why international pressure becomes like the main important thing about states making policy, why this eventually becomes the priority of the state in order to make that structural change in the first place. Okay, so even if I have to assume like these are policies that are good, even if these are structural changes that are good, the way you mechanize is only one-liner, and this one-liner is not intuitive to make me believe that this is what the state will do. Okay. There is a response from, so basically your argument in comparison to the argument of the opening opposition still triumphs. There is a response from closing government to opening opposition in the whip speech. In the whip speech, for example, the whip want to say that the existence of gay community right now have to be so underground, and we actually make it better because we make it more visible. However, you don't specify what is so inherently harmful with them being underground and why the community becomes so unideal. And there's an urgency to change this community from being underground to like being like more visible. There's also like some responses, which I think is actually a good fill up to the opening government, saying that the people right now that are forced to not come out are not happy with their current condition because they are forced to live in a world where they have to conform. And the way that they have to conform is that they have to be normalized with their community being so homophobic and make homophobic comments. I think this is also a good response. And this also fills up the urgency coming from the opening government because, right, you also show that these people are not happy, but you don't compare with the main argument from the opening opposition, which talks about that the people will eventually be stressed out anyway because they have this irrational fear of them being judged, even when the judgment has not happened yet to them. Okay, so this at best makes a deadlock about who actually provides a better like personal confidence or fulfillment to these homosexual people. But I expect closing government to like not only to neutralize, because I think opening opposition cannot rebut you anymore. So I feel I also think that your burden is like should be bigger than that. So that's why opening opposition got first. Okay. So let's talk about opening government versus closing government. Okay, okay, forgive me. I feel like this is so short. Okay, but if there is one adjudicator, I feel like I feel like the decision can change. But the reason why eventually closing government got higher than the opening government is because closing government is more accepting to characterization made by the opening opposition, because opening opposition plays in the worst, closing government plays in the worst case of opening opposition, saying that even though it's true that initial judgments might exist and like oppression might exist in the first days of this world, most likely this is something good, because right now the visibility can make people more understanding and more aware about how many gay people exist and how many gay people are currently living under the discrimination that is so unjustified. And this actually creates like more structural change to help these gay people. Like this is this I think a contribution makes more sense because in comparison to the opening government, because opening government kind of dismiss the existence of judgments in the first place. That's why closing government, when they make argument contingent on this characterization, I feel like this is more contributive. Secondly, why closing government triumphs over opening government is because you manage to fill up the important hole of the opening government, because opening government, as much as I consider the speeches in the opening government, I only consider your argument about, oh, they will be accepted anyway, as a mechanism or as a like preemptive rebuttal to the opening opposition. But when closing government talks about like there is so much suffering for these people, when the people are not able to come out, when there's like so much suffering in which they have to conform to homophobic society, in which like they're forced to be normalized and be okay with homophobic comments, this makes an urgency for these people to come out, so that the coming out argument so that the coming out part and acceptance part becomes an argument rather than just rebuttal to the opening opposition, or like some like negative case to just prove why acceptance can happen eventually. Closing government managed to say that why acceptance needs to like be done right now, immediately, because the people who are currently not coming out are facing so much struggles in their life. Yeah, basically these are the two tipping points. So and that's my verbal. Hopefully you all like. So yaudah ya kalau kayak gitu.